Well, across the country, there are plans underway for dozens of giant new waste incinerators. Let's talk about that. Local newspapers, and maybe this is true in your area, print page after page of objections from residents who just don't want to live next door to a giant plant set up to burn waste. They worry, of course they worry, about emissions and whether burning things is really the best way forward. It sounds medieval. Those in favour of waste incinerators say that modern plants are actually clean. They filter out the dangerous particles. You don't get black smoke coming out of them. And they can convert energy from the waste into heat. For these reasons, some hail them as much cleaner and greener than landfill. And that is why local councils are turning away from landfill towards incineration. The capacity to burn waste has roughly doubled in the last few years. And if the current trend continues, some reports suggest that by next April, more waste in England will be burnt than is recycled. You're excited by this. Maybe you live near the site of a proposed waste incinerator. You're not excited, you're furious. Maybe one has already been built next door. Please tell us about it. The industry calls the process energy from waste. 08000 288 291. Email vine@bbc.co.uk. And let's do a focus really on one proposed incinerator site to make this all clear. We're going to near the village of Stuartby in Bedfordshire. Ben Raza of the Times and Citizen newspaper in Bedfordshire. You can tell us about this. Is it going to be built? Is it in the planning stage or what?
If you'd asked me this time 2 weeks ago, it was on. Right now, it looks like it may be off. The people who've been fighting against this, it goes back to 2008, and they're set to put in their claim bundle with the High Court, hoping for a judicial review to fight the plans for this huge energy from waste incinerator.
And what is the actual area? Before we get into the actual incinerator and what that looks like, what's the area like?
Lovely, leafy, was brickworks area several decades ago, just midway between Bedford and Milton Keynes and Luton area.
And I gather this incinerator is going to be big, is that right?
Big would be one word for it, yeah. As I understand, we're looking at 105 metres high. We're talking about 500,000 tonnes of business and industrial waste being burnt every year. Is
it as big as Wembley Stadium, or is that just somebody exaggerating?
It's in that ballpark.
So it's huge. You're not going to miss it?
No, you're not going to miss it.
And no amount of calming strategies have worked on local residents, I can imagine.
No, well, as I say, this has been going back to 2008, and a former council, which has now been abolished, they wanted something that would only burn a third of that amount of waste, and that was unpopular. So you can imagine, you stick with the plan, you have 10 years of people getting unhappy about it, and you treble the amount of waste being burnt. It doesn't make for good publicity. And
obvious question, but why are people so unhappy?
Well, I think there's three main areas, really. Obviously, I've touched upon the size of it being trebled. Because of that size, it's also going to mean importing waste. It's not just a case of the traffic, but I suppose the argument then becomes, aren't we just getting pollution if people are driving from Berkshire, say, in order to not have waste? Importing waste from other parts of the country or the other parts of the world? Other parts of the country.
Right.
And, yeah, the third one, you touched again upon the cleanliness of the waste, but the figures I've seen, the plant, as I understand it, 3 times more nitrous oxide than a coal-fired power station, 6 times more lead, twice as much carbon monoxide, 70% more sulfur dioxide. Those are the sort of numbers that are being thrown out there, and again, they don't make for good publicity.
And the response from the people who want to build it is, oh, no, that's all old style. We've got ways of cleaning it and filtering it and putting a cap on it, but nobody believes them.
People are always going to be sceptical, and I think, as I say, the last decade really hasn't done anything to assuage people's concerns.
Keep us posted. Thank you very much to Ben Raza, who's content editor of the Times and Citizen newspaper in Bedfordshire. All right, let's talk some more about this. Colin Raine is from the protesting group, the Bedford Against Covanta Incinerator Campaign. Covanta is the name of the firm building it. Malcolm Grimston joins us, honorary senior fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy and Technology at Imperial College London, and also an independent local councillor in South London. So, Colin Raine, start us off. Does that sum up that call with Ben Raza, your objections?
It does indeed, Jeremy, yes. I mean, I would also add But there are rumours that the waste will come from Europe as well, because we're talking industrial and medical waste rather than household waste. So we're really quite upset about that.
All right, Malcolm, what's the case for building this thing?
Well, firstly, we've got to do something with the waste. Not everything can be recycled. So it does come down to a choice between producing energy from it and landfill. Landfill is a limited resource and lasts for an awful long time. The case for burning it is that it displaces fossil fuel use, so it's relatively low carbon. And modern incinerators, which operate at a rather higher temperature than some of the earlier ones, do tend to burn away most of the toxic materials. On the other hand, though, it's quite right. It is a large machine. This will be in an area, and local planning does have to be taken into account.
When you say they burn away the toxic materials, you mean you don't... Well, you must have some sort of discharge, surely.
Oh, yes.
Where does it go?
Yeah, and it will go into the atmosphere.
Will it go up into the air?
Yes, I mean, imagining that we can do any of this without any environmental effects is wrong. What we need to do is balance, go forward with an effect that will have the least effects. These will be very heavily regulated. There are very heavy UK regulations on what can be released, but the environment can take small amounts of and indeed we can take small amounts. So the figure's about 3 times the nitrous oxide and so on. 3 times what is the question? These are not levels that are going to cause any health problems.
So Colin Raine, 3 times the normal level of nitrous oxide shouldn't worry you.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I mean, the guy is talking about landfill. What he's really talking about is sky fill. He's going to fill the whole sky with pollution. You can see landfill. Anybody can see dirt and hasn't been poisoned from it. Everybody knows that we can get poison from the atmosphere if it's full of poison.
What about if they build a really big chimney?
They're building a 105-metre chimney anyway.
Well, I know.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to go nowhere near getting out of our Vale, because the Vale is actually a lot higher than 105 metres. We're in a bowl. We are actually in a bowl. So the stuff that's coming out of the top of the chimney is just going to come straight back down again with temperature inversion.
Let me read a statement from Covanta, who are building it, or may build it. The Rookery South Energy Recovery Facility has been designed in a way that emissions released from the stack, the chimney, will be well within the strict requirements of EU and British legislation. Public Health England advised that any effects are likely to be very small if detectable. The facility will produce low-carbon energy sufficient to power 75,000 homes from non-recyclable waste, which would otherwise go to landfill. There'll be 300 jobs during construction, and then afterwards about 40 or 50 permanent jobs. Does any of that excite you, Colin?
Oh, yes, so it does, really, yeah. I mean, the 75,000 households that it provides electricity to, we actually worked out that it's 1 light bulb in each house. So that excites me to start with. But actually, they're going to say that, aren't they? Like Mandy Rice-Davies says they would say that. You know, they really want to sell this incinerator that they now cannot sell in America.
But you don't want landfill, do you, near your house?
We don't want Skyfill, though, Jeremy. We really do not.
So what, Malcolm, I suppose the answer to this is put it somewhere else. Malcolm. Go on, Colin. Sorry, is that wrong?
I mean, I've been accused of being a NIMBY, as you can imagine. You know, we're those pesky people who are complaining about this thing going up. It really shouldn't be in anybody's backyard. This backyard that we're talking about is the backyard of the UK, not the backyard of Marston Moor.
All right, so before I go back to Malcolm, to be clear then, we'll get rid of it with landfill, and you would be happy if this site were used for landfill instead of for burning. Is that right?
I would be a lot happier if it was used for landfill, yes, because then they could keep the waste until they've got a reasonable way of disposing of it.
OK, Malcolm, how about that? Landfill doesn't send smoke up into the air.
I don't agree that landfill is environmentally benign. I mean, for one thing, the material tends to decay. This produces methane. There have been several explosions at landfill sites across the country when we used it far more than we do at the moment.
Really? Is that right? What decay? What creates that?
Any organic material, as it rots, produces methane. Yeah. This is just a natural process. Methane is natural gas in effect, but polluted natural gas, because there's other things mixed in with it. In effect, you get the same processes, but at a much lower temperature, which means you're not destroying the materials at the high temperature, which the incinerator does. The landfills also leach into the local environment in a very, very unpleasant way. They can get into water supplies. And some of the early landfills, not just in this country, but elsewhere, have really caused very significant local health effects. I mean, I've nothing nothing against NIMBYs, and we need to make sure that wherever we're dealing with the waste, it's in a place which will cause the least damage. But I think...
Aren't we all NIMBYs?
Well, yes, and I say that the local planning process is one of the factors that ought to be taken into account. But at the end of the day, we did a big study at Imperial about 15 years ago. I mean, by far the best thing to do with waste is not to produce it in the first place. The second best thing is to reuse the material. Once you've done that, incineration and recycling are about on a level, and landfill comes an awful long way behind in terms of overall environmental effects.
Well, there we go, Colin, and that's the expert speaking. If you have landfill, the ground will actually burp up methane.
Can't wait. Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, but that's the point. You said you want you would rather have landfill instead of...
Definitely, give us all the burping. But and I also want to come back on what he said about the local authorities agreeing with these things, yeah? Our local authorities actually fought this at the House of Lords during the planning stage. So our local authorities do not want this at all. They've gone against it totally. So it's not wanted by the powers that be. It's also not wanted by...
Nobody wants an incinerator near their house. Nobody wants anything near their house. Of course, we're all NIMBYs, aren't we? But in the end, if we have to have incinerators, is it possible to be in favour of one and say, but not near me? John Kent in Stonehouse, Gloucestershire, says, we've got one being constructed 4 miles from me in a very nice area. It is the most hideous-looking building I've ever seen. It's going to cause lots of infrastructure problems. It's been objected to for years, but we were never able to stop it. So the one that's interesting. That's Gloucestershire. We were talking about one there in Bedfordshire, and the fact that it may be taking waste from all over the country, not just from the local area. Isn't that interesting? Karen emails, I don't know what's wrong with incinerating waste. Why do we have such a problem with it? We've got a new incinerator being built near us in Surrey. Our unrecyclable waste will soon be burnt. Hooray, hooray, says Karen. No, the plant is not by my house, but I would prefer to live next to an incinerator than a landfill site. Is that what it comes down to? Yes, landfill, no incinerator, or the other way around? Katie in Warboys. Now, you've got plans. Where's Warboys? Is it Sussex, or is that my imagination?
No, it's in Cambridgeshire.
Cambridgeshire. And somebody somewhere is thinking that it's a good spot for an incinerator.
Absolutely. We've got the worst of both worlds. We actually already have a landfill on the site. It was an old brickworks that has a landfill that has been filled up for a very long period of time. The landfill has just been completed. The locality was under the impression that that would be it as far as our neighbourhood or our communities would be concerned. And now we have an application for what they call a construction of a heat and power source, and also an evaporation treatment plant, which doesn't sound too bad. But in fact, what they're doing is shipping wood from around a very large radius of our tiny village, and the evaporation treatment plant is actually evaporating the runoff from landfill, not only from our landfill site, but from landfill for about a 30-mile radius. So they're going to be shipping tankers of leachate, this runoff, which has goodness knows what sort of toxins in it, up a tiny little narrow road that is single track with passing places, which apparently is suitable for these kind of vehicles. And they will be building a 25-metre chimney on the fenland. And
yes,
as people know, the fenland is very flat, so it will be visible for miles around.
Is a chimney going to despoil the landscape?
Absolutely. It's a 25-metre chimney. The planners have told us there will be another 30 metres of visible, I would like to say steam, but effluent, whatever is coming out of the top of the chimney, which obviously causes another huge concern. So if you imagine it's already 20 metres higher than the area around us, the planners maintain it will be visible for 4 kilometres, and in fact it will be visible for as far as the eye can see.
Okay, Katie, thank you very much. Now, somebody who can tell us what it is like to live near an incinerator is Adrian Elliott in, I think it's Nampian in Cornwall. Adrian, where? Just give us an idea of where that is in Cornwall.
Good afternoon, Jeremy. It's exactly midway between St Austell and Newquay.
Well, it sounds beautiful, or at least it was beautiful. Is that right?
Well, we're up. It's actually quite an industrial area. It's the old China Clay Works areas. They built the new incinerator. It was fought against by the locals in a village called St Dennis, which is about 3/4 of a mile from me as the crow flies. It was completed last year and lit for the first time in April. And ever since then, it's been struck with problems. The screws that actually take the waste down into the incinerators keep bending, which then it goes offline. Each time they light it up again, we get plumes and plumes of black smoke out the top of it. The two chimneys, they've had to put a bridge across the top because they used to clang together in the prevailing winds. And the stench, basically, they've got electronic doors. So as a lorry arrives, the door opens, it drives in. Once it's tipped, the other door opens and it drives back out, but they've had problems with that. The doors don't shut back down again, and then the stench just comes out of it.
Oh dear! So, well, we haven't had anyone mention the smell yet. That there is a smell, is there?
Oh, it smells.
What does it smell like?
Rotting vegetables, decomposing. Just think of your
cabbage.
Well, basically, if you remember back to when the rubbish collectors was on strike in London a few years back, and it was all piled up on the streets and it was stinking up.
Yeah.
Think of that and then double it.
Okay, let me just get it. Stay with us, Adrian. We've got Alan Jack on the line who's in Ayr. Your son works for an incinerator company, and his job is to make sure it doesn't smell, but it sounds like you're never going to get around that.
Well, my son is the chemist in the incinerator plant on the south bank of the Thames in Kent, and his job is to make sure that what goes up the chimney stays within the standards and make sure that the ash is allowable.
Yeah.
All his rubbish comes down the Thames. There's no lorries come into that plant at all.
Yeah,
the rubbish is barged down the Thames.
I understand, but the point Adrian is making is that when you burn, you make a smell and you create smoke, and it doesn't matter how much technology you do. That's the way the world works. You can't stop that.
My son says his plant doesn't smell.
Right.
Maybe the design of his plant is better than the design of the plant in Cornwall. I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert on this.
Sure, but does he? That doesn't matter.
What my son tells me.
I understand. Does he work inside the plant, Alan?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, he's got a lab there.
So he's not coming home every night smelling?
Oh, no. In fact, he lives in South London, so, I mean, if he came home smelling it, I don't think his wife would be too happy.
Well, Adrian, that's strange. Have they got better technology there or something?
No, it's not when you burn it. It's actually when the waste arrives on the lorries. Now, obviously, the one in Erith in Kent, it arrives down the Thames. That's fine. But our ones all arrive from right over the county, and also we are already bringing it in from Avonmouth and other locations across the UK because our recycling figures have gone up. This plant is designed to burn 250,000 tonnes per annum. It's like a baby. Once it's lit, it has to be fed. And our waste stream, the recycling level has gone up, so the actual waste stream has decreased, so they're now having to ship it in by lorry from Avonmouth or Manchester, wherever. And obviously that's not a very green thing to be doing, bringing it down in 44-ton trucks.
No, but that's really interesting information. Thank you both. It's got us somewhere there, hasn't it? It's not the burning that makes the smell. It's the process, the movement of all the horrible rubbish that isn't burned into the plant in the first place. One foot in front of the other way. Generators. And whether we should be worried if one is built near us. Steve Hill says incinerator technology has improved. In central Japan, they incinerate 80,000 tonnes of rubbish a day, and they've got no problems with it. Daniel Dolman in Plymouth says, I've recently had an incinerator built near my home. It's noisy. It produces a dull hum for a short period of time during the early hours of the morning. Overall, the impact it's made, though, is minimal, except for the noise. You don't realise it's there. So he's not worried about the smell. Aaron Foles in Keighley says there's a proposed incinerator near me. Has everyone in the country got an incinerator being built next to them? It sounds like it. There's one near where I am, says Aaron. We're about a quarter of a mile away from the site. I've got severe asthma. It would be sited at the bottom of a valley, which is against the World Health Organization guidelines. It is not just the emissions from the incinerator. It's the 70 HGVs visiting the site every day that could actually kill me.